everyone here. So this is not saying that this is the absolute way you're supposed to be doing it. It's just us sharing information with each other and how we think about something when we draw it. So that's what we're going to do today, is on Donald Duck. So how I'm going to begin it is I'm going to show you what I do when I draw his body. And what I usually do is I'll run the line off the back of his neck here, because when you think about your neck, it connects up to the back of your head. And Donald's body, it's like a duck's. So I don't draw him standing straight up. I kind of curve his back a little bit. In fact, I'm going to extend this down a little bit more. Because they say that he's 4 heads tall. And I know when I draw the characters, I have a tendency to sculpt it out at first to kind of feel where the character is. So I'm always adjusting. And there's 3 words that I always think of. I know that Jackie knows those 3 words, and so does Derek. And those 3 words are?
Round, round, round.
Round, round. So what I usually do is I'll try and figure out how the position of the character is, and then I'll come back in and then start defining. But I always think of the character in terms of sculpture. And then here, sometimes to help myself out, I'll put in where I want his arms to fall. It helps me. And then knowing where his legs fall. And I'll do a lot of basic shapes. And then as I start to define how I see the character going, then I come in and I'll start readjusting. And again, if I think about it 3-dimensionally, that always helps out. Knowing, using these lines, these relationship lines, like especially up in here, as this comes around here, knowing that his smile is going to come up in there. So if his smile line's here, it's naturally going to be over here as well. But before I even put anything in, I always kind of figure out those. And then when I come down to his legs, again, I do the very basic shapes. When I look at how Peter Emsley draws Donald, I love how he draws it. And Peter Emsley's work really, I looked at his work a lot, the way that he does it, the style. I like how he puts that look of, like, I call it suspended animation, where it looks like he literally stopped it midstream. By the way, drawing up large like this, and I think, Mike, you could probably test this, drawing up large like this, it's hard. It's hard. So I have to step back to look at it. And then when I go to drawing his arms, I'll just put very, very simple shapes. I might expand his arms out just a little bit more. Again, I'm looking at it distance. And when I have his hands bent at the wrist, so again, just very basic shapes. I might have this hand, I'm just going to have this hand turned down. He's getting ready to hold on something. See, even then it looks a little bit long. But that's what I'll do, is that I'll get his basic shapes. By the way, never draw with one of these grease pencils. These things are a pain.
That's all you ever draw with.
Well, when I'm doing a demonstration like this, yeah. But most of the time it's... So in essence, this is what I do, is I'll get the basic shapes in, and then I start to flesh it out. And this applies to any way that I'm drawing the character. If I'm going to draw the character in a pose or something like that, a different kind of pose. I'm thinking about how that jaw comes down below here. And then as I draw the character, then I start coming in and defining things a little bit more. But I think all of us can agree it's constant adjustments. Now how that goes down here like that. And we have one eye here. And then this other eye, as we all know, it wraps on the outside of the eye. And then the eyebrows, of course, this one kind of hugs the outside of the circle here. And again, when I'm drawing the character, I'm always thinking about that I'm doing this for three-dimensional sculpt or something like that. It helps me when I think of it that way. And one little trick, and I forgot where I got it. I know I saw it somewhere. In determining eye direction, if you want to do this to help you out, you can split the eye down the middle towards the direction that you're thinking he's looking. So then when you come back in here, see, you center it right on that line right there, see? And I think that helps. Now when I think about that tuft of hair that comes up in here, I'll usually play off of that. And again, not trying to make these look all the same size. As Ron will tell you, you know, in animation, what do they call it? That sawtooth?
Yeah.
Where all the hair looks the same. But if you vary it, with variations a little, and then longer. But then I start to come in here and I'll start to define. And when I think about that bottom jaw, I think about it being a rounded kind of square. I think of it rounded, not squarish.
Brian, can I ask a quick question about the jaw?
Yeah.
I always screw this up. I have his mouth wide open,
Right.
and it cheats and it goes too far back, and then it's like through his neck.
I get the same thing sometimes too.
Through his neck, you mean?
Well, you know what I
It
mean?
looks like he's really like got a,
Like this?
yeah, but like his back jaw, you know, really covers up his neck so you can't see it. I'm assuming that's what you're
Yeah,
talking
almost
about.
like it's
Yeah.
going too far. It's just a matter of just restraining that.
I don't know, because when I look at some of the drawings that Peter Emsley has done, and I've looked at the other people, because I study everybody, and if you don't think I don't study the rest of you, I do. I look at how you draw, I watch how Mike draws, I look at Casey's, the way they draw. We all approach him differently. And on Peter Emsley's drawings, I've noticed that the neck will be, he'll have it hidden behind there. I don't usually see it, because then he starts coming in here and you'll see how, you know, when you put in the shirt and all, it kind of obscures it a little bit. And the other thing is when I do put in that, I don't even know what you would call shirt, I like to extend it out a little bit, just to get a little bit of life to it, you know, to break the silhouette. And again, I'm thinking, you know, round, 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 thinking round, around here. And then when that shirt comes off, I think of it draping off the front part of his body. And I'll extend it down a little bit here so it breaks that silhouette. And I'll even put a little wrinkle line in the back there like that. I think adding in wrinkles, it adds more life to the character. Maybe a little wrinkle in here. And notice how, when I do it, I make it thin here and then it flails out, it expands out like this. I don't make it the same distance here and here. And then once I find out where I'm comfortable with the character, I'll emphasize the line, I'll make it look thicker. But all I'm doing at this point is I'm just trying to determine the shape or the pose more than anything. I'm thinking how his legs are planted on the ground. His head's looking a little big here. And again, always when I'm drawing his hat, I'm always about thinking through how that's coming through his head like that. And once I feel good about how the hat is, I'll make some thick and thin lines. It's like when we were in art school. They'll say about if you make some lines thicker than others, it gives volume to the character, volume to whatever you're drawing. And then that tassel. When I draw it, I have it come out. I start, and I've seen it though, where it's the same size all the way down. I've seen that. But one of the things that I try, I know the first and foremost thing that I think of when I'm drawing a character, or any of the characters, I try and think about appeal first. Because I asked Ralph that once, and I said, you know, how do I draw Mickey? What's the way to draw him? It seems like I'm always having a struggle with him. And Ralph said, think of appeal. You know, that's the main thing. Get the appeal going, and then the rest will fall into place. So I've got this going here, and then I'm thinking about the tie. And I think of that as being taller up here than it is down here. So when I'm drawing that tie, this is kind of like what I'm thinking of. It's larger up here. Up here. And shorter down here. That's what I think of. And then when I start to draw on the shirt, again I'm thinking round, 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 and I'm thinking as this goes back like this, it's hanging down off his arm. Again, I like to put in those wrinkles. And the same thing goes over here. But I like to make this open, because sometimes it gets squished right in here, so it gets too tight. So I open it up a little bit. Again, it's all about that believability factor. His hands. I always think of the thumb following this, because your thumb goes like it doesn't do a strange thing or goes way back. It doesn't look right. I think Ron and we talked about this the other day about how his arm is. Sometimes you're saying it's really thick, and sometimes it's thin. You know, I've seen it both ways. And that hand like that. And then, of course, the stripes. always thinking about that round. Because when you look at the characters, there's really no, boy, his head looks big there. There's really, there's no straight lines on this character, on any of the characters, really. And I always think of that center toe as being more pronounced. So again, I come back in here and I adjust it. And on the tail, sometimes I'll separate that feather, again, just to break it up a little bit. And of course, down in here, you get that one big one here and then a little here. And I'll put that little fold in here as I start to define it more. Again, I like to put in the wrinkles. And sometimes I'll put those nostrils in, sometimes I won't. Again, in some, we'll say if it's really close, if you're doing a real close-up of it, then you'd see the nostrils. I've done it both ways. And I always emphasize on the top here, I always make that a little bit thicker. I think that pops the eyes a little bit more. So I kind of look at it as being like eyelashes. So that's why I add that in there. And when I think about his beak, I think about it as being, almost made out of plastic. It's bendable. And remember that neck, I always have to remember that the neck extends down here to the top of the chest. And wrapping this around, this goes around. Does that make sense? Are there any questions as to how I think about it?
Take a comment about the eyes.
Yeah.
One of the things that Ralph had told me early on was that think of the eye as an egg shape, not an arch. Like you know, so it's rounded at the bottom as you have there.
Yep.
But sometimes people have a tendency to make it more like an arch than rounded, but where that shape flows into where the beak is.
So yeah, when this comes down, yeah, like you're saying, like this.
Yeah.
Yep. And you're right, Ralph used to say that. And how I always, and I should have said this earlier, how I equate that is I think of that as being, to what Mike said, like eggs. I think of Donald, bird, eyes, eggs. So Mike's right in that. And I think that's a very important point to bring up, is that his eyes are egg-shaped, ovally. And they sit down nicely right in there like a nest. When I talk to kids on how to draw Donald Duck, I always say to kids, this is like a roller coaster. You start up and you go down, and you go up and you go down, and you go up. So that's what I think of. On his hands, that's the other thing too. And again, when I look at that book on Peter Emsley's hands, I think that those are really good examples of how to draw the hands. Also, Haino, Medevilia. Right? Some of you are familiar with Haino. He showed me, a trick on how to draw the hands. Because I think all of us have challenges with the hands of the characters. But I got to tell you, since I've learned this from Haino, I'm finding it easier to draw the hands. So I'll think about that. I'll start with that basic shape, now add on, I'll make it look like a mitt, almost. It's almost like a mitt, a glove. Or if he's pointing. Well here, let's do one where he's grasping something. I'll put the thumb in front first. And then you get the rest of the hand. Making that middle finger larger. this, you know, he's really clenching that fist, and this would be more rounded. But I'm not afraid to extend the finger outside of the circle, see, like, just very basic, that's what I think of, very basic shapes. Round, 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 round. Maybe a little bit of a wrinkle here because he's bending his wrist. I can extend that out a little bit more. There you go. Like that. Or if he's pointing. Starting off with that basic circle. And again, I usually like to try to draw that thumb in first because that helps me. And sometimes I'll extend that finger out like that. Because I think that adds more expression to the character. There's Monty himself. And then when I think about, like when he's angry or something like that, I think that's real simple to do. By the way, this is difficult to draw standing up like this off to one side. I find that things kind of tilt a little bit. So I'm going to go to the front here. But again, I'm thinking about him as being a three-dimensional object. And usually people can tell right away when you do that, right, one thing right there, and then you add in that right there. They know right away that that's done with up. And you know, I sometimes will like to do a squash and stretch like on his mouth. I'll bend that lower lip just a little bit. You know, to get some more emotion into him. And then when I'm drawing him, I'm always thinking about, or any of the characters, I'm always thinking about parallel lines, and also when the character, you know, that squash and stretch, I think that's the most basic thing, and Ron will tell you that in animation, is squash and stretch. So I'm always thinking about that when I'm drawing the characters. So I'm thinking if his eyes are coming down, if this opposing force is coming down on his eyes, well then it would be naturally pushing the eyes down. And if his cheeks are coming down like this, then this would be more straight. It wouldn't be rounded. It'd be pulling down on it. And his eyes, I always like to do his eyes kind of cross-eyed. When he's angry. And I can see now I'm standing right here and move this over this way. But I always tell Jack, I know with Jack I say it's always a question, or it's always a matter of constantly adjusting as you're working on the character. And then when I think about these brows that come up, I always kind of have a tendency to make them fatter up here and then thinner as they come down. And I don't have them extend out the circle. And of course, when I start adding in the hair, and I call that hair because it's not really feathers. I've read it and they described it as hair, and of course the crankier here is the better. And then here, that's when I'll put those nostrils, but I'll have them following the contour. I'm thinking about the contour of the bill and how it goes. And I like to to add in shading underneath here, because I'm thinking about, you know, shape. And then with the hat, we all know that the hat has life to itself. So I might tilt the hat a little bit. And give it that bean shape. So I'll emphasize on that line here, this weight. Think about weight. Maybe having a little bit of that hair sticking on that side over there. I know that when I wear my hat, my hair sticks up on the side, so I think about that right here. And of course, coloring this in. And I find out, like for shape, if I darken up one side and then come out light like this, it gives it a nice three-dimensional look. So I'll do the same thing for his eyes. I'll darken it up and I'll go light. Darken it up and I'll go light. But then I'll also start to emphasize this, because I'm thinking about how these lines are actually going onto the eye, or hugging that eye. And sometimes I'll even do this. Are there any questions so far? Are there any questions? No? Is there any way that you guys approach it that you could share?
I think one thing, when you're talking about the nostrils, a lot of times it'll come down to the product you're designing it for. So
Mhm.
if you're working in soft lines, you'll leave the nostrils out
Right.
because they're not going to embroider at such a small area to like look right.
Mhm.
They're just going to be too big. So a lot of times that the product itself will influence some of the decisions that you make when you're drawing.
And that's a good point too, that Casey had made, yes, right, it does come down to product application. You know, and a lot of the times too, when I'm drawing the characters, if I'm drawing them in a scene or something like that, I try not to do motion lines. I challenge myself to do it without the motion lines, because when you put motion lines in, I think you're almost kind of force feeding to the person that's looking at your work as to what the character's doing, like motion lines, like if you add in some lines here to make it look like his head's turning or something like that, you know. I don't do that. I try to capture it, because I've noticed that about Peter Emsley's work. He won't do any of these lines or anything like that. Like maybe he might do this, you know. And I've seen other artists do this too. You know, add these in, which is, you know, cool. I think that conveys emotion. Not motion, but emotion. And of course, I forgot the tassel.
So I was just gonna say that instead of relying on that sort of thing, like you're saying, like, you know, where you see that in a comic book, or I mean, a comic strip,
Right.
with those lines and stuff like that, it's more clever to use, you know, feathers or sweat or his ribbon in order to convey that emotion, you know,
Right.
in other ways that you can still get that across.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the other things too is like when I think about drawing the character from the back, again I do the center lines. So I'm really looking through the head. Again, you can see no one gets it right. I don't know of anyone that gets it right the first time around. So I'm coming back in here and I'm adjusting. And I think about that eye. Parallel, something about parallel. Parallel to this. Think about how that shoulder, everything, you know, you're drawing through, and then the little wrinkle is right here, you know. Again, I think that that adds to it. And you can add in things that make it more believable. Round. And then how that hat would fall. And maybe I might just do this. Because when you think about when he's in a good mood, his that little hair or whatever sticks up. When it's a bad mood, it becomes really flailed or laid down. You think about how this goes with the shape of the head. Again, thinking about dimension. And when I think about the brows up here, I got this thin here and this thicker here. So that's when I think of when I'm thinking of the back. And of course, I'll usually make this go back here like this.
You wouldn't show it starting in the center?
You know, that's the
But-
funny thing is, and there's been arguments about that as to where it sits. And I think on the hat, and I'm going to agree with you on that, there's that, they say there's a seam. And I've seen it like that where it comes out like that.
I thought it was like a button, like in the center, that it, where it was attached.
That, I believe, was in the older things of Donald.
Okay.
And then they eventually, and you can look in the style guide, eventually what it was is there's an invisible seam that cuts that hat in half. And it comes off like that. I've looked at the old style guides and I've seen that, because that, I think, has been one of the greatest mysteries is how does that,
Well, how did you do it on your turnarounds for Pat Donald? Or he has a top hat on in your office. didn't
yeah, he has the top
Yeah,
hat.
that's right.
So, yeah, I was able to cheat on that one.
Right.
But you might want to ask Ron on the turnarounds that he did with Chip and Dale. Remember Chip and Dale and Donald with the ice cream?
When we get the sheet.
Yeah. Or you can bring in the actual sculpt.
Oh.
But when I'm drawing that hat, I'm thinking about weight again, and squishing it. This hat has almost got a life of its own. It's its own little creature. Does that make sense? Any questions? Or any comments? Anything you'd like to share that, you know, a way that you think of when you're drawing Donald? Come on, you've been drawing Donald for many years now, Mr. Jones.
You know, I think it's important to always remember to think of him as a bird. Like when you're drawing his arms, like in my mind, the upper arm is skinnier than the forearm. You know, I think of it in my rough, kind of like that, kind of like a wing, and Donald's hands and fingers taper, you know, like a wing. So like the abstract in your mind, keep the bird idea in mind, you know, and then obviously when you go back in, you're going to humanize it a bit more and you know, taper the wrist and, you know, get everything more as a cartoon.
Right.
But keep the wing idea in the back of your mind when you're doing layouts and stuff.
And even the bend of the body.
Yeah.
Even the bend of the body. I've seen it where Donald is standing almost straight up, like this. He's bent. You know, he's a duck, and he's got a waddle to him.
And I don't even know if we actually have a copy in the reference library
Mhm.
of the Pete Emsley books with Nephews and Scrooge
Mhm.
and Donald and Daisy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that DDG has a copy. I mean, I let Jackie just borrow mine when she
Mhm.
was training. So, if we don't have those, I wish we did. Oh, I see.
Now, how does that,
It's kind of, well, this kind of looks like it's above the scene, but
see,
here's that senior technology.
see? In fact, I wanna show that to the camera. Cause we're recording all of this. Oh,